Do y'all want to hear what true passion sounds like? Kurt Cobain once said, "If rock and roll was illegal, throw my ass in jail." How passionate can one be about rock and roll, right? I know most of us here have at least one thing that we love so much to the point where that said thing is what is behind our incarceration. Is that a cat? Is that a loved one? Or is that a simple passion we couldn't live without? When exploring the alternative rock group Nirvana, there are 3 points that can give you a grasp of how this grungy group was like. First point being the formation of Nirvana and the background of its members. Second is the impact and they had on society and music. And third of all is the downfall of Nirvana. Now, has anybody here heard the name Kurt Cobain? Does that ring a bell? Even if you haven't heard any of Nirvana's music, you might have heard that name in passing, as it was a pretty popular name in the 90s when Nirvana became mainstream. Let's deep dive into the band members of Nirvana. So Kurt Cobain was born in 1967 in Aberdeen, Washington. He was musically inclined growing up as well as artistically inclined. When he was a teenager, he had a passion for punk rock music. Punk rock was pretty underground at the time, especially where he grew up. Most people didn't listen to punk rock, but there were a few people his age in his town that enjoyed punk rock. They would get together and they would listen to the local band, the Melvins, play. This is eventually how he met Chris Novoselic. Chris Novoselic, he was born in Compton, California in 1965. He eventually moved to Aberdeen, Washington in about 1979, and he eventually got a job at the Taco Bell during his teenage years. Him getting a job at the Taco Bell gets him to meet kids his age that also had the love for the punk rock music, and this is eventually how he meets Kurt Cobain. Chris eventually graduates high school and goes on to work for about a year, and then he comes back to Washington where Kurt is still at. And Kurt asked him if he wants to be in a band with him, and Chris eventually agrees. Now, starting a band, you're going to need a band name, a drummer, and they had a hard time finding both of those. They went through about 5 names and 5 drummers. Ended up picking Nirvana. Nirvana means peace, enlightenment, and it's opposite of how they portray themselves. And that's the vibe they were going for. They wanted to be opposite of what their name meant. And for the drummers, Dave Grohl was the one that was there when they had their breakthrough album all the way until the end of Nirvana. Now, Nirvana led the grunge movement in the 90s. When you think of grunge, Nirvana seems to come up a lot. Grunge was a subculture and a type of music genre. As a music genre, they would call it the Seattle sound because grunge originated in Seattle, Washington, where Kurt and Chris were from. They were from Washington, so they kind of really started that grunge aesthetic. And as a culture, it was how you dressed, how you thought, etc. And not only did they change the culture, they also changed the music industry. Music producers realized there was a big fan base under the grunge music and under alternative rock, punk rock. There was a big fan base there, so they started seeking out artists that sounded similar to Nirvana. Now, unfortunately, Nirvana officially came to an end April 5th, 1994, when Kurt Cobain shot himself due to mental health issues. Kurt Cobain early in life was diagnosed with bipolar, but he never got treatment for it. He was always depressed, but he always kind of managed it with substances, and he got into addiction, and he was in a relationship that fueled his addiction. His wife, Courtney Love, fueled his addiction, which was a relationship that was looked down upon many. To sum this all up, the journey of Nirvana, from their humble beginnings to their impact that they had on society, really shows by the mark that they left on pop culture. The band members Kurt Cobain, Chris Novoselic, Dave Grohl, and all the other drummers in between, they laid the foundation of the grunge movement and persuaded many listeners. Despite their poignant end, The legacy goes on to inspire and resonate many generations after Nirvana. It doesn't even matter if they make music still, they still inspire many. Thank you.